Okay, it's March 18th at 5:03 p.m. and I'm going to call the meeting of the Planning Commission of the City of Carver to order. Let's start with roll call. John Krasick.
Here.
Bob Soltis.
Here.
Larry Bradbury.
Here.
Amanda Bennett.
Here.
Shannon Greina.
Here.
Tom Brown.
Here.
And I'm Greg Hooksema. And I guess with the city staff, we have Carl DeSimas, Michelle Thomas, and did I hear Molly's voice?
Oh, it's probably people behind me talking.
Oh, okay. Nope.
Yeah, I'll mute myself here.
No worries.
And that's going to be one of the challenges for us going forward, is having these meetings now that people are in cubicles and trying to keep things quiet in the hallways. So
Yeah, no worries. And there's Kim. Hi, Kim. Kim Mahoney from the city staff has joined us as well.
Hi, Commissioner.
Okay, so first item on the agenda, as always, is to approve the minutes from the last meeting of March 4th of 2021. Does anyone have any corrections or discussion about that before accept a motion? Okay. Someone like to move a motion?
I move for approval.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed say nay. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so we have a bit of a full agenda, I think. So why don't we dig right in with the Shoreline Management Plan update? And I think, Carl, you're going to take that, is that right?
that's correct. Sure. Thank you. So yeah, we will be discussing the Shoreline Master Program periodic update, and as well an additional amendment that's been proposed by the Public Works Department. And so this is become sort of priority one for us to get these two items across the finish line. And actually, before I start, since we sent out the link last week and the memo, the cover memo, there's been a bit of a change in priority in process. So our original plan was to run the periodic review at the same time as the public art in the Shoreline jurisdiction. But now we're going to run them sort of as separate processes. So they're going to be kind of running concurrently. We're going to be bringing things to you at relatively the same intervals, but we're going to be running two sort of public processes. So there will likely end up being two public hearings, and two comment periods, and so the excuse me, the public art amendment has sort of taken the front seat, and the periodic review has taken a back seat in that regard. So I just wanted to caveat the beginning of the meeting with that. So tonight, what I'd like to do is run through just briefly the periodic review, kind of give the commission a really brief update on where we are with the periodic review and what our plan is for getting that across the finish line. And then I'd like to really kind of chew into the public art on public property in the Shoreline jurisdiction. Sorry, I have a hard time with that title. I say it different each and every time it's kind of a mouthful. So anyway, so that's what I would like to do tonight, if that's okay, Chair, and the rest of the commission, if we kind of move it in that way.
Sounds good.
All right. So really quickly, so I'm going to share my screen, and what I've done is I'm going to kind of just run through a few of the materials with you, and please just, I think, just stop me along the way if you have any questions, or, you know, wait till the end, and that's fine too. Either way is fine with me. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see my screen okay here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is just the memo that I prepared as a cover memo for this meeting, and it was meant really to just kind of give you a really general overview and kind of a catch up on, you know, where we are and where we've been with the periodic review mostly. And then it also introduces the idea of this public art in the Shoreline jurisdiction. And I'm really not going to belabor any of these materials too much, and I hope you've all had a chance to kind of sort through them a little bit. And again, you know, if you have questions about the periodic review items, I'm certainly open to answering any questions. But like I said, you know, I think I'd really like to focus on the art piece tonight, and then maybe come back at the next meeting or even the meeting after that to dig into more of the detail on the periodic review. But I guess I'm, you know, if you have burning questions, I'm certainly open to answering anything that you'd like to know more about as far as periodic review goes. But back to the memo, you know, I really wanted to highlight the number of times that this has touched the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has touched the amendment, I should say. And you know, you can see here there's been at least 5 times, and I think there may have been 1 or 2 other meetings in there as well, but it was kind of hard to get back through the record to find them all. So this has come before the Planning Commission quite a bit. We've done a lot of vetting and trying to get this across the finish line. And like I said in the memo, really we're down to just a couple of items that really kind of hung us up. And one of those is really a big one, and it's been real difficult to get through that hoop, and that is the amendment that's relative to the flood hazard construction standards ordinance, which is chapter 1810 in the Gig Harbor Municipal Code, and finding consistency between that and the Shoreline Master Program such that it will satisfy both FEMA and the State Department of Ecology. And that's really where the rubber is going to hit the road in this process. And to that end, we have the City Council has budgeted dollars so that we can bring Greddy and Associates back on to help us get through that process. And we're working very closely with our contact at the Department of Ecology, who's a senior shoreline planner. And we've already reached back out to FEMA as well to get a little bit more clarity. And that's really what we need, I think. So in the interim, between now and when we bring the periodic review back to you for some real serious consideration, we're going to try and get that clarity so that we are very clear on what those items are that FEMA needs us to do in order to create that consistency between the code and the program. And then, as I said, you know, I touched on, at this time, I was only really just touching on the arts piece. I was really more focused on the periodic review in this memo, obviously. So I didn't give that a lot of face time in my memo. So I hope that you were able to look at the application materials that were provided for the art piece, so that we can have, you know, a bit of a constructive conversation tonight about that. But let me run through the periodic review here just briefly. This was the very early memo that came to the Planning Commission, and I just highlight this because it really tells what the scope of that periodic review is. to assure the master program complies with applicable law and guidelines in effect at the time of the review, and to assure consistency of the master program with local government's comprehensive plan, development regulations adopted under Chapter 3670A RCW, and other local requirements. So that's really the scope of what the periodic review is and why we're doing it. This I included in your packet that really gives you the nuts and bolts of what the periodic review rules are, when we're supposed to do it, why we're doing it, and what it is. And I think it's important to note that we adopted our Shoreline Master Program in 2013. We were required under the SMA to review that, go through the periodic review, and update our Shoreline Master Program at least every 8 years. And so in that case, in this case, we were required to do it in 2019, according to the WAC and these periodic review rules. So that would have been 6 years. Obviously, we're into 2021 now, so we're a little bit behind. But we've been working with Ecology to ensure that we're not in any hot water or in violation of anything. They're working with us. They know that we're working towards getting it done. So we're still in good standing. And then the next review, as you can see on this schedule, would be in 2027. Also in this guidance, I just wanted to sort of call out, this is kind of hard to see here and I apologize, but this kind of runs through the process of how the periodic review works. We start with a checklist that's provided to us by Ecology that gives us all of the amendments to state law that has happened over that period of time since the last adoption to the periodic review. And as well may include some amendments that the city proposes, that staff has noted over those years, and changes that need to be made as a result. We go into the review, evaluate for the amendments, public scoping period, and this is where we sort of determine whether or not we have any amendments that are needed, or if there aren't any that are needed, and that takes us down one of these two paths. Of course, we're in the amendment needed path, and so we are currently in a revised SMP local public process. This is kind of where we're at right now. When we get to adopting the amendments, we'll be at the council, and then we'll be sending all that off for approval by Ecology. And so Ecology also, we do work closely with them, so they're also reviewing a lot of these amendments.
I know, I'm on planning commission, just waiting to say my piece, so I thought I'd call.
Hey, Katrina, you're unmuted. Okay. So anyway, so we get to Ecology approval. What I was trying to say then is that we're working so closely with Ecology that by the time we get to this approval, unless there have been any major changes made by the city council, if the city council has taken your recommendation and not made any changes to it, then Ecology has basically already seen the amendment when they get to this approval process step. So I included, this is the original periodic review checklist that a lot of you have seen and know well, as we've been working through this for a while, or I guess maybe not a lot of you, just a couple at this point. It's been going on for so long now. But this, essentially what this does is goes through, as I was saying, all of the amendments that are required by Ecology for changes that have been made during that period since adoption. Going back, in this case, going back to 2017. So we have then 3 columns, a summary of change, a review column, and then, and then an action column. So the review column is kind of where in our Shoreline Master Program you would find this, this needed change. And then the action column is what needs to be changed and or does it need to be changed. In some cases you see it's in A. And this column is also sort of a live column, whereas we're going through review and ecology is going through review. We're making notes saying that, you know, maybe we need to deal with this now, maybe we would deal with this when we get into looking at our critical areas ordinance, or it doesn't need to be dealt with and here's why. And I'll show you a table that looks like that. This table is obviously unamended. So, you know, just running on through this, this goes all the way back to what, 2007 changes that we need to review for and have reviewed for the most part already. And then in 2018, which is when we started our periodic review process, the city had a bunch of amendments, as I was saying, that we are also proposing. And so we throw those in this table too, so that the Department of Ecology can see what our ideas are for amendments and they can make comment on those as we're moving along. So moving on to the next then checklist, this is kind of how the live checklist ends up looking, at least how we've been running it, with different reviewers named up here. Kim Van Zwallenberg is our contact at the Department of Ecology who we work with. And she has, you know, made her comments in this as well. This is kind of the last working document that we had before everything kind of came to a full stop on this process. And I didn't give this to you guys in your packet this time because I didn't want to confuse things too much, because right now Grady is going to be going through a review of this checklist, where we've been versus what we need to do versus what amendments we've already made to the master program as a result, and then come back and add notes and update this checklist so that we've got we're more up to date, so that when it comes to you, you've got the latest information, because some of this is kind of old at this point. But I'm bringing it to you tonight really quick just to kind of show you, you know, the green is obviously things that we've dealt with, and that the Planning Commission has already reviewed and either made comment on or sort of accepted, not in a formal recommendation, but and certainly we can revisit those items too. But the yellow items on this checklist are things that we're still kind of working through. And those are the items that we're asking Grady to look at carefully and ensure that we have clarity on what still needs to be done with those, or have they already been dealt with, and we just need to update this checklist. And the one that's really got us hung up is down towards the bottom here. Oh, maybe not towards the bottom. Where is it? Oh. All of a sudden I'm lost. I've been looking at this thing for days. Right here. Amend subsection 6.2.5.23 critical fish and wildlife habitat areas consistent with revisions to Gig Harbor Municipal Code chapters 1808, which is our critical areas ordinance, and 1810, which is our flood hazard regulations ordinance, to address proposed FEMA special flood hazard area regulations, the door to B approach. And so that is to come into consistency with door 2 under the National Marine Fisheries Services BIOP that was written as a result of the National Wildlife Federation's lawsuit against FEMA, where FEMA was found to be out of compliance with the Endangered Species Act through their National Flood Insurance Program. So it's a real convoluted story, and it gets real messy and it gets real confusing. But it really comes down to what it really boils down to is that all local jurisdictions have to decide if they're going to be a door 1, a door 2, or a door 3 community, and that is how they will assess habitat areas within their shoreline jurisdictions to ensure that where you have overlapping floodplain development regulations and your shoreline jurisdiction, to ensure that you are not creating a net loss essentially of endangered species habitat. And so currently the city of Gig Harbor is a door 3 community in that we assess whether we are in compliance on a permit by permit basis. And so in that way, we have to send out the habitat assessments that we receive from applicants to federal jurisdictions for their review, and that's a 45-day review. What we would like to be is more of a hybrid approach between door 2, which is a more programmatic approach, to say that we are in compliance because our regulations are already protecting the habitat. And so there's no need for any additional review. Our regulations are signed off and sound, but we still want to do it on a permit by permit basis, but we'd like to just use our regulations to do so. Versus door 1, which not many jurisdictions utilize, but door 1 is a model ordinance that was written by FEMA that you can just adopt whole cloth, throw it into your code and just use it. So I know that I'm probably not doing this a ton of justice. Probably a lot of confused folks after trying to describe that. But when we come back, after we get clarity from FEMA and from ecology, and Grady has had a chance to get their teeth back into this again, I will come back with a very clear and concise description of what it is we're trying to accomplish, and what the hang up is, and what the solution is if there is one. Couple others that we have to deal with here, but again, I'm not going to belabor this too much unless folks have questions. And then, of course, the amendments, the actual amendments, were also included in your packet. And so part of what I wanted to do tonight was really ensure that these are going to be the working documents going forward as far as periodic review goes, and I wanted to make sure that you were all familiarized with what these documents are, sort of how they fit together. And so if you come back to the, to the checklist back here, even the original checklist, and look at any of these regulations that need to be changed, you can go and find this subsection. And if there has been a change made, then it'll be back over here in this proposed amendments document. So you can see what has been changed. And in some cases, there's some notes in there because these are still working documents, but that's the real connection between the checklist and the amendments that we've made already. Is there, maybe we should stop there, and if there's any questions about the periodic review, maybe we should tackle those really quick, and then I can move on to the public art piece.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Carl, because as you indicated early on, I'm not sure who besides me, maybe John, has been involved since the beginning of this process. So we don't perhaps need to rehash everything. I think Carl has laid it out nicely, and if you had a chance to look over the enclosures, it gives a good recap of what we've done over the years. But nonetheless, please, if you have any questions or need some clarification, go ahead.
Just a comment for Carl. I was involved in a different kind of periodic review, but also related to the planning process in a prior life. And Carl, I can tell you, it always runs late.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel better.
I have a question, Carl. So these changes, these amendments, when you're presenting it, can they be presented as a whole package or do they have to be done individually?
So do you mean the art piece as well as these periodic review? Or are you
Right.
talking about, or do you mean everything that's on this, on the checklist?
I mean, both pieces, like there are so many different amendments and changes that my question is, would the planning commission make a recommendation on each one or as a whole, or does it depend?
No, so we would ask the planning commission to make a recommendation on the whole package as far as the periodic review goes. Now, the shoreline, the art in the shoreline jurisdiction will be a separate recommendation. So that is going to be, that's a separate piece, even though it's still proposing amendments to the shoreline master program. We're allowed to amend, while we're only allowed to amend the comprehensive plan once per year, we are allowed to amend the shoreline master program multiple times per year, even though it is part of the comp plan, but that's an allowance in state law. So it would be two separate recommendations, Commissioner Grin.
Thanks.
Carl, could I just clarify quickly something that you just said? The comprehensive plan by state law can only be amended once per year. However, there are instances by which we are allowed to amend it more than once per year. And Shoreline Master Program amendments are one of those very, very few exceptions.
Thanks, Katrina.
Okay, why don't we move along then, Carl?
Okay. Right, let me see where I'm at here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this amendment has been proposed by the Public Works Department, and the impetus for the amendment is project related, and so it is specific to a project. However, we were looking at the project and trying to figure out how we could make this project work in the shoreline jurisdiction on public property, and we found that it was going to be maybe impossible the way our code and program is written currently. And so we reached out to Ecology to find out if they had any advice or what could be done, if anything. And we were told by Ecology that actually public art has started to become an issue for a lot of jurisdictions who have master programs that were adopted in the last 10 or so years. And they have found that it was sort of a missing element of those programs when we were adopting our programs back then. So we have, after discussing with Ecology, we found that we may have some support there and we may be able to find some examples in other jurisdictions where they have made allowances for specifically public art on public property within a shoreline jurisdiction. And so because it's the particular project that was the impetus for this was a public works project, they applied for a comprehensive plan amendment to amend the Shoreline Master Program to find, to explore a way of allowing public art in the shoreline jurisdiction. And so that's where we are. I'm going to let, or that's why we have, that's why this amendment came forward. I was going to let Kim Mahoney sort of describe briefly what that project entailed, sort of as background for how these draft regulations have come about, and then I'll come back to the draft regulations and also give you some background on what else we're working on related to this amendment. So, Kim, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I'll be pretty brief. The project is proposed to be installed at the Austin Estuary Park in Gig Harbor. It is commonly referred to as the Honoring Project, and the intent of the project is to pay homage to the Native American local history that we have here in the harbor. Thank you for pulling this up. This is a site plan representation of the project. And so the Public Works Department reached out to the Planning Division back in December of 2019 with some questions on feasibility and some general, zoning and, regulatory questions from the SMP. And it took us a little bit of time, but up until last year, we had a formal pre-application conference where the applicant was informed that there were going to be some complications with the project from a regulatory perspective, particularly based on the shoreline designation. And so, as you can see, the footprint of the proposed art piece is rather close to the ordinary high water mark. If you can identify where that is, thank you. That line right there, thank you, Carl. And so it posed an opportunity for creative thinking among the team, because it was very evident that this would be met with difficulty in being able to secure the appropriate permitting, namely that the site would require a variance from the Shoreline Master Program setback requirements and buffer requirements for the Category 2 estuarine wetland that feeds off of Gig Harbor Bay right there. And so, of course, we have a very strong working relationship with the Department of Ecology. I spoke directly with them to be able to kind of, verify my suppositions and my interpretation of the SMP, which feeds largely from the SMA, the Shoreline Management Act, administered by the Department of Ecology. And they were in concurrence with our interpretations of the SMP provisions, and how difficult it might be for the applicant to be able to meet all the criteria necessary to secure a successful shoreline variance permit. And so in conversation with the applicant, it became, it was kind of determined that the best and potentially only way about going about permitting their project as they have it proposed is to change the code, which, as Carl indicated, turned out not to be as crazy of an idea as we maybe initially thought. The Department of Ecology was rather supportive of the concept that many other jurisdictions are experiencing this same difficulty, where there was almost this oversight in the adoption of local SMPs in jurisdictions that didn't consider the cultural significance that art pieces of this nature have, within closer proximity to the shoreline than what is allowed in the SMP prescriptively. And so that kind of brought us to where we are today, where we are looking at a need to amend the language in our SMP, which translates to a need to amend our comprehensive plan.
And that's a really good point too, Kim. I want to emphasize that this is, even though this was project, it was driven by something that's project specific. We are looking at crafting regulations that are relative to any project, any like project, in the shoreline jurisdiction that's relative, that is for the public benefit. So that's really the, that's the end of the day, that's the goal of these, of this amendment. So I want to go back here. Thanks, Kim. That was really good. I want to go back to this, which is a narrative that was proposed by Public Works. So this is just kind of a rough idea that they proposed that could be, at least it gives us something to sink our teeth into and to start thinking about. And before I talk about this, I just want to note that so Greddy and Associates is also helping us out with this project, and they are already working in the background on analyzing not only these regulations, these draft regulations that are before you here, but they're also exploring other jurisdictions amendments and what they have actually adopted and that ecology has approved. They are also exploring, where something like, where a use like this should live in our program. Here it's proposed in Chapter 717 under recreational uses and development. We've discussed the idea of maybe making it its own chapter within the master program, maybe a 7.22. They're also exploring the possibility of including a related exemption in the Shoreline Master Program, depending on what the scope of that public art might be. Not exempting it from all permitting altogether, but certain aspects of the program. So just looking at a lot of different angles. And we also have to be wary of, when making these changes, what sort of tendrils the amendment might have, and also how it relates to the critical areas ordinance that is adopted whole cloth into our program. So basically 1808 is adopted completely into our master program. And so, in this case where we have shoreline jurisdiction and we have requirements relative to buffers and vegetation conservation strips, we also have estuarine wetlands that have their own buffers relative to them. And so that's also something that we have to consider when crafting a regulation like this. So just really quickly going through what's been proposed here, we obviously need to define what art is. This is a first stab at a definition of what public art is relative to the shoreline jurisdiction. We need to talk about use and what actually use relative to critical areas and relative to, like I was just saying, to the vegetation conservation strip. In this example, or in this draft, we are saying that public art would be, that is associated with a water dependent use, would be also considered a water dependent use. So, and water dependent uses are exempt from needing to include a vegetation conservation strip. So there has to be, we'd have to make some nexus, some relationship between public art being a water dependent use and whatever the other use is of the property that it's sited on. We need to look at where we would allow these, in which shoreline environmental designations, and would they be permitted, which are the Ps, would they be a conditional use, which is the C, or are we saying that they would outright not be allowed in a particular shoreline environment? And then we would need some regulation around that use, and that's in this draft. We're including that within Chapter 7.17, which is recreational uses and development. So really, before I open it up to questions, we've asked our GIS coordinator to create this map for us as kind of a talking point going forward that sort of shows all of our shoreline environments throughout the bay. And then it also shows those public properties and parks that an amendment such as this would be relative to. So these would be the limited areas that this allowance would be made in. So, you know, up here, Donkey Creek, where the actual project that was the impetus for this amendment is in Austin Estuary here. Our other parks along the way, and you know, the newest park down here at Soundview Forest. The one that's not included here, this is a city owned, the city does own the spit now where the lighthouse is, although it's just outside the city's boundary. So I think that's why he didn't include that, but we may want to consider that one as well. So I think, Chair, I think I'll stop there if that's okay, and maybe open this up for discussion, because what I think would be great to get tonight would be any questions or fatal flaws or concerns that the commission has at this early stage in the development of this regulation, and because it's really good, it will really help staff and the consultant in our analysis of this as well, and in crafting maybe more specific language, or you know, bringing back a more complete draft to the commission for consideration.
Okay. Well, thanks for that concise presentation, and I don't know if you want to switch back to where we can all see each other, maybe.
Okay.
And if we need to refer back, I think everybody has that sheet on there, should have that in their email if you looked at the enclosures that were included for the meeting.
Okay.
If you have a computer handy, you can refer to that, or if you need it, you know, Carl can pop it back up again. But floor is open.
Okay, a question here. Actually, a couple of questions. Carl, I noticed there's a size limitation of 20 square feet. Is there any height limitation?
So that's a really good question, Commissioner. And the height would be limited by the shoreline environment. Am I right, Kim?
Right.
And or the zone that the parcel is in. So
Okay.
height would be a consideration in this, absolutely, but it wouldn't necessarily, it's already regulated in another section, so we don't need to touch on it.
Okay. And then a second question is, should we include murals in the definition of art?
It's a very good question. I'm going to make a note of that question.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I just am wondering if it makes sense to add it with in 717 recreational uses and development and public art. I mean, I'm just questioning if it gets more convoluted than if it was its separate entity.
It would be more convoluted if it were a separate chapter?
No, I think the opposite. I mean, it just seems like having all three of those things in one item could potentially open the doors for misuse is what comes to mind, or misinterpretation, but that's just my thought.
Yeah, we had a similar thought, and in our internal discussions and staff discussions, we kind of came to a similar conclusion that having a separate chapter would not only allow us to be a little more concise and make it, like you said, less convoluted, but we could craft those regulations really far more specifically to public art itself.
Hey, Greg, I had a couple questions, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
One thing I kind of worry about is, when you change it from an exceptional kind of thing, like it requires a waiver, to something that's allowed kind of more routinely, that there could be, could this lead to a proliferation of more public artwork than we really had ever intended to see along the waterfront? It's hard to argue with a 20 square foot or less statue, but is that, are we simply opening the door up for, a lot more of this stuff? That's one question. And secondly, Carl, the terms water dependent use, I have a hard time getting my head around that for a statue or along the water. I mean, is that because the theme of the statue is water related? Because you could have a statue that's not near the shoreline that was water related, but it doesn't have to be necessarily in that little treacherous part of the floodplain. So
Yeah,
I guess I'm trying to question, why do you say water dependent is a kind of a little bit of it seems to me a little bit loose or weak, if you will.
Yeah, Kim and I actually had this discussion earlier today in trying to wrap our heads around that, trying to find that nexus between the water dependent use of the site and associating a water dependent status on a piece of art, and what would that, it would almost require its own definition in some way. So I think that's a really good point, and I think that might be troublesome in this draft. I think we may have to find another way around that.
Commissioner excuse me, Commissioner Solstice, it's another really good question that you bring up about proliferation of art along the shoreline. Definitely is not the intent of this amendment to come forward that we're going to see a stark increase, I would say, of art along the shoreline. I think one of the things that this is attempting to do is limit it to city park property. And for the art to be recommended and to go forward to a permit approval, I think staff mentioned, this is from the Public Works Department. And prior to this coming forward, it went through the Arts Commission as well as the Parks Commission for kind of through a public process to see if the art was wanted and the location, et cetera. So it did go through those two boards and commissions, and then it had to go through City Council ultimately. So it wouldn't just be that the city decides to place art here, there, and everywhere. It would need to go through a process by which the appropriate chain of command would indicate that that art should be placed there.
Thank you.
Does that need to be put into this document discussing the review process in this, or does that not make sense because that's part of kind of a different process and it's not part of the shoreline management program?
Yeah,
it makes sense to put something in there related to the process under which public art is reviewed and approved by the city or something.
So that's another good question. My professional recommendation would be to allow that to stay within the rules and procedures of the council and the Parks Commission. And just know that there's internal policies that would not allow the Public Works Department to apply for a permit if it did not receive approval from those
Okay, that makes
entities.
sense.
I have a couple of follow-on, comments and questions. Some of which may sound contradictory on the surface, but I want to explore both sides of this equation. So on the one hand, if we're looking to do this, then it would make the most sense to me to begin with a code from a jurisdiction that has been doing this for a while, and we can learn from their mistakes. And make sure that permissive wording is right, and make sure the restrictive wording is right. And get it right the first time, instead of making a best effort and then not seeing the unforeseen consequences of our well-intended decision. So that would be one. So my recommendation would be, let's find a go-by. Also on the permissive side would be, and it goes to John's point of earlier, once you try to define art, it becomes a never-ending list. And so if it's to be permissive, the wording should be very broad. And what is art? I don't know how to define it, but I'll know it when I see it. The famous quote from way back. What is pornography? I don't know, but I'll know it when I see it. So I would say if we're going to do it, let's not try to make a list, because we're bound to forget something. And so just define art in a very, very broad sense. And so there's got to be a definition out there somewhere. Maybe even the Art Commission has such a definition that's already in the Gig Harbor's code somewhere. And you can interrupt me and comment anytime that you want, because I'm on a roll here.
Well, let me speak to the first item that you brought up then, Chair, that we completely agree with you. And the first thing we did was reach out to Ecology when this was all brought up to find out what we should do, and have other jurisdictions been in the same space, been in the same predicament. And it turns out that there have been we got a couple of examples provided to us right out of the gates. Kenmore and Olympia. And we have the Kenmore example is not as good. It doesn't really get to what we're trying to achieve here. But the Olympia example definitely does. And, Olympia is a, obviously prominent city on the shoreline, and they've been at it for a long time. So we like those examples, and we've asked Gretty and Associates to go and try and find a couple more good examples. And when we have those, we'll likely be providing them to you at the next Planning Commission meeting for your consumption and consideration as we're talking about this, because I think that's a really good point. That's the exact same conclusion that we had come to. And I completely concur with what you're saying about the art definition as well. Kim and I have joked with each other a couple of times about that. Oh well, what is art? And you just could, you can say anything you want, and that is kind of the point of art too. So I think you are exactly right that it does need to be a really broad definition, and so I think we should ensure that the definition, whatever definition we come up with, is narrow, or not, I'm sorry, is broad enough to open it up to interpretation in some manner. And while I say that, we always want to try and create, when we're writing code or regulations, we tend to want to try and define everything and capture any nuance that might come up and be a question. But maybe in this case, it's not so apropos. So I think those are both really good points.
Okay. And another point on the permissive side of the argument would be, I wouldn't be in favor of things like, well, specifically, I'm not sure, what's the right number, at 200 square feet, or, what if the coolest project in the world was 210 square feet? Would it get an automatic reject? And in some places, 1% might make sense, but in a really large parcel, it might not make sense. And in particular, though, the one that probably bothers me the most on the permissive side is saying only one piece of art per parcel. And again, please understand, I'm not arguing for the proliferation of art all over the waterfront, but if we're going to do it, I want us to be thoughtful. And so there may well be cases where a large parcel could handle more than one piece. And you look down on the waterfront, you see those three giant, a clam, a mollusk, and something. Is that one piece of art, or is that three pieces of art? And they look, right in place, and I think people enjoy them. I think Gig Harbor, the artwork that they've placed, on the Bogue viewing platform, there's that bench that gets a little more into the modern art. There's the incredible sculpture down at Crescent Creek. There's the artwork on the side of the new Ansich, where the net shed is, the building that houses the restrooms, with the metal sculptures, is all nautically themed and sea themed and very consistent with our history. And on a restrictive side, I would love to see that kind of thing continue and kind of be a requirement, to have it so that we don't just start getting these kind of out there bizarre pieces of art that somebody calls art, lots of people may enjoy, but doesn't have anything to do with a turn of the century Croatian fishing village. And given that, so then I would want the permitting process to have some kind of intense scrutiny built in, so that no single person could ever allow a piece of art to be put in place. That there would have to be some thoughtful group of people who look very carefully at any piece of artwork that would be proposed along our precious waterfront. And so that's on the restrictive side. And then sort of another piece with respect to the thing that stimulated the specific request here in Gig Harbor with the homage to the native people, which I think is a great idea. Why do we even have to call that art? Why can't it be called something else completely, that already we can find a place within our code to create a memorial to the native peoples of Gig Harbor? And then we don't have to deal with an art code or an art amendment.
Carl, if you're comfortable, I can address the chair's question. Chair, it's not so much how we're defining the structure, it's the location of the structure that brings us to the point of where we are with needing to make some amendments to the SMP, with it being located 12 feet from ordinary high water. It's just art or any other kind of structure would be met with scrutiny, particularly based on the amount of available space on the remainder of the parcel.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so in finding an allowance for that, we think it makes sense to define it as art in that way. So allowing these, something that's publicly available and something for the public enjoyment, which is really, which is part of what this is why we've kind of gone down this road to say that, this is what else, what would we call it otherwise, I guess. And we don't, to your point, I don't think we really have anything in our code, and we certainly don't have anything in the program that would allow for something to be placed, as Kim said, in that location, that close to ordinary high. And so in that way, then you have to find some justification for that kind of encroachment. And, we didn't think that there would be any justification to be had for doing something like that when we first started talking about this, but lo and behold, there is. So, so we've, decided to embark on the journey of trying to create this language. I wanted to talk really quickly about, let's see, limiting the square footage. I think so, and I wanted to correct. There were a couple of other commissioners who had noted 20 square feet. The draft actually does state 200 square feet would be the allowance. And I think what the chair was describing and talking about there was really important, because that's something that we've discussed internally too. And when I was introducing this whole idea to you all, I don't know if you caught that I had mentioned that we're also exploring the idea of an exemption from the shoreline substantial development permit as part of this. Now that language is not included here because it's kind of it wasn't an idea when this was drafted, but it's become an idea since. And that we wouldn't think of that as a whole cloth. Any public art on public lands in the shoreline jurisdiction should be exempt from a shoreline substantial development permit. But we think that in limited cases, if it were strictly limited by size, hard surface percentages, and those sorts of things, if it was able to meet certain limitations, then maybe it would be an exemption. And then anything larger than that would have to go through the full process, the full permitting process. And so that's been kicked around a little bit, and Reddy and Associates is actually doing a little bit of analysis on that to see if that's even something that's viable. I mentioned it to Ecology just to get a sort of a heat check, and they didn't necessarily balk at the idea, but of course they would be scrutinizing that pretty heavily whenever you talk about exemptions from development. We have to be careful, and and we're certainly not trying to and wanting to create anything that is going to create any kind of ecological damage or net loss to the shoreline jurisdiction, and it certainly couldn't either, because the master program is set up such that regardless of what is allowed in that area, we're still going to have to mitigate for any impacts, and we'll still have to, and through that mitigation, still have to go through mitigation sequencing per the program. So, there's already fail-safe sort of set in place in the program to address that.
Which we are not proposing to change.
Which we are not proposing to change, that's right.
And so, Carl, would that preclude the necessity to give more stringent criteria other than just the 200 square foot in the amount of space that it takes up? What about depth? Is that covered in a different place? If someone proposes a 200 square foot something or other that needs a 20-foot foundation on it, how is that going to be taken care of?
That's a great point, Commissioner Bennett. We've talked about that too, especially in this location. that's definitely something that has to be of concern and has to be addressed in these regulations, and is currently not addressed in these regulations. But
Okay.
I don't know, Kim, have you had any time to think more about that at all?
Well, I
or-
think, so structurally, I think that would be taken care of through the building division and the public works department's review in all of the applications. But from a habitat perspective, in case there's any, critters that live down there, then I would expect the habitat report that would be required to be able to inform no net loss. I would expect for that report to be able to describe that information. And then, through that, we would have an understanding for the amount of mitigation that would be necessary to be able to achieve a no net loss to ecological function.
I made a note of that though, Commissioner, but I think just to make sure that we don't lose that
great
element, I think that's important.
Right.
And then one more thought on what the chair was talking about with tying it to the history and archaeological and cultural richness of Gig Harbor, tying it back to that. That is something that ecology touched on as well. And they noted that when we were adopting our Shoreline Master Program, there were allowances made for the net sheds in the harbor. And those allowances were provided solely based on that tie to the city's heritage. And so she said that really should be an important factor when you're crafting this regulation and in thinking about this. And so I've made a note of what you said there, and I've got some other notes on that as well. And so that's definitely something that we're looking into as well, and that we've asked Reddy to look into, and how we can tie that to, how we could tie something like this to other elements of the Shoreline Master Program to show that that is the intent. And I think it is the intent of what we're trying to do. Again, we have to remember, and I sometimes lose it when I'm talking about this, that this is only on publicly owned property. So only on city-owned property would we be making this allowance, allowing this use. And, like you were saying, most of that art that we have on those publicly owned properties now is paying homage to that cultural history of this place. And so I think that is, I think that's important, and I think that it should be captured as well in this program.
Carl?
Yes.
I've been listening to the discussion, obviously, and given the complexities that we're talking about here, I am not clear regarding why we need to go with an amendment to the SMP vice when there is a need such as the one we're discussing going forward with a variance or exemption process.
Well, that's a great point, Commissioner Bradbury. There is no exemption that would allow for this use in that location. So the exemptions in our program are very specific to certain criteria, certain uses, and or the sum total of the dollars that it takes to build whatever it is that you're trying to do. So the exemption is off the table in this case. But Kim, I'll let you speak to the variance if you could.
Sure. Yeah. So at present, because our SMP does not include any language that would give any sort of relief for an art specific type of structure like this, then the structure is held against the same standards as any other structure in the shoreline. And that includes the required amount of distance that needs to be provided between the ordinary high water mark and the structure's foundation. And then on top of that, there's a Category 2 estuarine wetland that's associated with Gig Harbor Bay on this site that has a 110-foot buffer. And so and that buffer encompasses the entirety of Austin Estuary Park. And so one of the requirements for any structure to receive a successful shoreline variance, which is ultimately the approval for a shoreline variance is given from the Department of Ecology. One of the requirements is to prove that the applicant is requesting the least amount of relief necessary to make a reasonable use of the site. And so that's very difficult to say when there's 100 other feet, landward of where they're proposing to be able to put this site that is far less intrusive on the really sensitive ecological environment there in Gig Harbor Bay. That's a very, very difficult standard to possibly meet. However, it was very important to the applicant that the cultural significance of the piece is so dependent on its close proximity to the water that they felt as though moving the structure back further landward towards maybe Harborview Drive would remove all of its cultural significance. And so I guess the long and the short of it is that requirement that a shoreline variance has a number of criterion that each have to be met to receive a successful variance application. And that one, just in the objective opinion of city planning staff and the Department of Ecology, just couldn't be met because we just from a Department of Ecology perspective, they're the Department of Ecology. And although they have, they're sensitive to and have a regard to the value of art, because it's not in our SMP, we can't hold it to different standards than any other structure.
All right, thank you for that explanation.
So I guess, yeah, I was wondering in my mind, what's driving the location here. So you just answered that, sort of, because I would still offer an opinion that others might express, and that is, okay, I understand how the applicant feels about that, but it gets back to a point I made earlier that I don't want to feel pressured into making a decision, creating an amendment to meet what could be interpreted as meeting the needs of a very small group of people that doesn't necessarily represent the feelings of the majority of people in Gig Harbor, and I have no idea whether it does or not, such that people would be willing to support this kind of an exemption, because we're talking about extreme here. As you pointed out, we're 12 feet from the high water mark, ordinary high water mark. And so, gosh, at an absolute minimum, I would want there to be a long public comment process opportunity for people to chime in on this. And we have two things going on here. One is the specific project, and then the other one is, the larger thing of, do we create the opportunity to have artwork, within the city-owned water sensitive parcels around Gig Harbor.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's a difficult conversation because I'm choosing my words very carefully.
No, you're echoing so many conversations that Carl and I have had, and I think that we feel really empowered by a lot of the other municipalities' code provisions that we've been able to get our hands on. Particularly, in my professional opinion, we're fortunate to have our hands on Olympia's language because they are just like the epicenter of regulation. The Department of Ecology is based right there in Olympia or in Lacey, right thereabouts, and they have similar shoreline functions as we do. And so I think we're fortunate to have our hands on language like that provided Carl and I a little bit of some, I guess, relief from that same kind of concern, which is that they have provisional language in some of the SMP art allowances that have allowed for similar distance and proximity to the ordinary high as what we're talking about, that maybe initially was not very palatable, but becomes a little bit more palatable when we can see that other jurisdictions are successfully implementing that in their codes, after a due public process and things.
Yeah, we too recognize that we don't want to, we certainly are not wanting to craft regulation around one project, or just to get one project done. We need to look at a broad, look at this more broadly, larger scope, and look down the road, because the problem with doing that, and that happens often in jurisdictions, is the unintended consequences that creates. And so we want to be very careful in this and try and keep it relatively generic, while still meeting the needs, still accomplishing what the applicant would like to do, but ensure that in the future it's not going to preclude other projects from moving forward.
Hey, Carl, when this thing went through the Arts Commission, the Parks Commission, and City Council, was it understood then that this would be intruding into the floodplain area?
I was not a part of the project at that point. Kim, can you speak to it? I don't know if
Either, Carl.
no. And I don't know if Katrina would know that or not either, maybe.
That is a good question, and I would need to go back and fully familiarize myself with what the council was given. To my knowledge, I don't think that I don't know if the floodplain came up or if it was going to be placed above or below the high tide line. I think they were leaving it up to Public Works and the committee for the art to determine its location. I can say that the council does know of the general location in which the art is proposed.
Thanks.
So I kind of crawled way out on a limb there, and I'm waiting for one of my brave fellow commissioners to either say good luck, buddy, or chime in with a supporting or contrary opinion.
I don't think you have a very powerful argument, Greg, on that one. I think I understand how you're very careful with your language, but it may be a very small portion of the community, but I think it's a very important, makes an important statement that is good for the whole community, whether it's strongly endorsed by the whole community. It's endorsed by the council, and I think really it does have some really long-term ramifications for us as we kind of come to grips with the 21st century. So I think it's probably a small but mighty project that is worthy of our serious consideration. And I'm being weasel wording too, because I'm not as good at it as you are. It's
Well,
important to the
obviously, I have
community, I
not
think.
seen the project, but I have to be curious as to why it would lose its value if it were located a little bit further back from the floodplain.
Commissioner Bradbury, to also choose my words carefully, that is something that staff has questioned and has had many conversations with Public Works regarding. And ultimately, if this SMP amendment is passed, the Public Works Department is going to need to determine where the high tide line is for the new regulations. And Kim, I don't believe Commissioner Bradbury was here for your high tide line presentation. So if you or Michelle wouldn't mind sending that PowerPoint to him, that would be great. And so just from a practical standpoint, if the art is going to be placed at or below the high tide line, this particular project that again was impetus for this amendment would require U.S. Army Corps of Engineer review. And that would make the project approval for this, 6 months to 12 months longer than if it were to be above the high tide line. And so I can't say, because we're not the applicant, but I would imagine they would want to avoid that. Also, I will say that at some point soon, we will definitely bring a Public Works representative here for you to ask specific questions about their request as we go forward with work sessions. And I think we'll have a robust public process of hoping to get public input, so you'll be able to hear from citizens both on the amendment and some of the other questions that you've asked tonight. So I really appreciate the thought about what the community thinks and kind of how you're coming at it from all different perspectives and kind of questioning the proposal. I think it's valid.
I think these questions, particularly the one that Commissioner Bradbury just asked too about why it couldn't necessarily be put back further, what have you, also likely relates a lot to just the culture of tribes. And I don't even know what the artwork is, but having worked a great deal with tribes just in my everyday work, tribes put a huge regard for water around here. And so it could very well, this piece of art could have to have a distinct relationship with the water and would just potentially lose its meaning not being that close to the water with whatever the type of artwork it is. So, and maybe the art just doesn't become the same art that it was if it wasn't as close to the water in this case. I'm not quite sure. I'm also in agreement with Commissioner Soltis in that I think this is a worthwhile project to take on and to add in here, even if it is just for one right now. I would imagine that even though this is the first that we've seen, it's not going to be the last. And even if this one somehow went away and wasn't approved, at some point someone will bring this up at some point with just more of an emphasis on public art in cities and a lot of cities putting in 1% for the arts and different things like that, that I could see more of this coming on board here.
Okay. Well, lots to think about, I think.
And if I could, Chair, I just wanted to echo I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about process before we were done with this discussion. So whenever we are done with sort of this part, I could talk just briefly about kind of what this looks like going forward, or come to an agreement with you all on what this looks like going forward.
Okay. Well, that'd be good.
Should I do that now? Okay, I'll do that. Sorry, that was awkward, wasn't it? I apologize. So yeah, there will be a very robust public process with this, and that's because we are working hand in hand with ecology. This will be going through a joint review process, which makes it go a little bit faster on, as far as the legislative process goes on our end, in that we are combining, essentially combining our public comment period prior to a hearing with the Department of Ecology's. Now, the Department of Ecology requires a 30-day public comment period prior to the hearing, and then they require that the jurisdiction respond to and document and respond to all public comments that are heard within that public comment period and at the hearing. We have 30 days to respond to all of those and make any amendments to the draft after the public hearing. Once that's done, then we would send the draft on to Ecology for review. It's their initial consistency, what do they call it? Excuse me. Initial determination of consistency. The Department of Ecology has up to 30 days to conduct that review and get back to us with any comments that they have. And then at that point, we would go to the council, and the council would hold their hearing, first reading, potentially adopt or make amendments and have another reading. So, and I should back up, prior to the beginning of the 30-day public comment period required by Ecology, we are to post all of our documentation on our website for public review 2 weeks prior to the beginning of their 30-day public comment period. And we have to submit a live link to the Department of Ecology for their review of that website as well, and to ensure that we've got all of the information up there and that it's completely open and transparent. So there's going to be a ton of opportunity for folks to chime in and ask these questions. Some of the questions probably that you're all asking, and definitely say their piece. So, and which is great, because that's ultimately what we want, especially for something like this that is very much in the public domain. I mean, we're talking about public art on public property in the shoreline jurisdiction, that is protecting, and while at the same time we're trying to protect something that is really important to the public, which is our environment. So I think it all kind of fits together. As far as our process goes here with the Planning Commission, our goal is to to take the comments that we've heard here tonight, along with the draft regulations that we've been discussing here, and the research and work that Grady and Associates has done, and cull together a draft ready for full public consumption, and get that up on that website next week, and get that out to the Planning Commission for your careful review and consideration, and ready for another study session on April 1st. I have my dates correct. I do, yeah. We're hoping, if all goes well, timing wise, and just within the discussions and where Planning Commission is at and comfortable, we are hoping to get to a public hearing with the Planning Commission on this as early as May 6th. But we're still kind of working that schedule out. It's all developing as we go, but like I said, we have some constraints on how quickly it can move, just because of the of Ecology's public process, frankly. So but that's kind of tentatively where things lie right now. But we certainly want to bring back more detail to you on April 1st, and hopefully have some examples from other jurisdictions, including the Olympia example we have now. And I'll probably present those regulations in a PowerPoint, so that we can kind of look at the important pieces line by line that are apropos to what we're trying to accomplish. So, and if there's anything else, just based on what you know now, that would be helpful, please let me know, and we'll pull that together and get that to you for that meeting as well.
Okay. All right. In the meantime, is there some place we can go to see what this project is all about?
It hasn't actually been an application, I don't think, has it, Kim? It's just been a pre-application at this point?
We have the pre-application materials.
I mean, is it just a concept, or is there a drawing, or, I mean, what's it going to be? What's it?
Kim, you can forward the planning commission the pre-application materials.
Mhm.
Okay,
Please.
thanks.
I want to make a clarification, just for the record, that although there is a known project that could benefit from this amendment, the amendment needs to be looked at holistically for all city-owned properties per the request.
Yeah, appreciate that point, Katrina. Okay, and kind of I don't want to say clarifying, but adding to something I said earlier about it, the importance of the artwork reflecting, that this was a small fishing village, in the turn of the last century, settled by Croatians. It's equally important to acknowledge, understand, and honor the tradition of the indigenous peoples who settled this area and lived here for hundreds of years before the fishermen arrived. So I think your point is well taken, Bob, in that regard. Okay, well, I think we can put a bow on that discussion and move on to the last agenda item. And that is a follow-up discussion about the role of the Planning Commission. Another thing I think we can put a bow on. After we had our last discussion at the Planning Commission meeting, Carl and Katrina and I had the opportunity to have a discussion. Katrina wasn't at the meeting, and so was just able to explain to her what we were thinking as a commission with regard to what our traditional role has been and what some new ideas might be, some new opportunities. And so I thought it would be good for Katrina to come back and join us again, despite her busy schedule, and let her reflect a little bit on that discussion and give you her perspective.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I first want to state that I think it's, we want to let you know how much we appreciate your volunteer service to the city, and appreciate you spending your evenings with us. And I think the conversation about what further role the Planning Commission can and should take with specific sideboards of the city's municipal code is a good conversation. We do know that the primary work that the commission does is council directed by a work plan, which we've gone over the work plan with you all. And I think, to my knowledge, you all have an understanding of the projects that will be coming forward this year. That being said, I do think there's latitude within the Planning Commission regulations. Oh, and the mayor's waving at me from the window. I do think there's latitude within the Planning Commission regulations, within our code, to allow for subcommittees to study certain things and to bring back recommendations to the whole. We will need to, of course, decipher if and when those subcommittees are set up, proper OPMA rules following, et cetera. But if there is something that, the city is not working on that commission members, feel needs to be looked at, or if there's a particular area of interest that, several commissioners have, it is my opinion that if there's enough interest, that could be carried out, of course, within the proper parameters of, we would need to have, minutes, of what was talked about and anything that you want to bring back just for transparency's sake. But yeah, I think we would be open to those discussions. I think part of what we also talked about with the chair was, we have a lot that's going to be coming forward to you, where even with the SMP, we may be asking you to meet more regularly in order to get this work done. So there would be just an acknowledgement that, this subcommittee work, if undertaken, would be kind of in addition to the regular duties that you've signed up for here with us, 2 Thursdays evenings a month. And I'm happy to answer any questions that commission members have on that.
Okay. Well, thanks for that feedback and closing the loop on that. So again, I think my feeling at this point is that that as a group, we kind of table that, pending the fact that I think we're going to be busy. But having said that, any time that anybody wants to bring forward and put something as an agenda item that, hey, I'm interested in this, does anybody want to form a subcommittee? Then that can be brought forward at any time within the parameters that Katrina described, because we're making big time commitment here. We've been going for more than an hour and a half tonight. I think that's going to become our regular kind of scheduling. So we look forward to the opportunities.
One other thing I forgot to mention, sorry to interrupt, is I think we all agreed in our meeting that with Carl and the chair, that if the Planning Commission would like to schedule an annual meeting with the City Council, that's something that we would be happy to set up. And so work programs could be discussed, general ideas. If there was a subcommittee that reviewed something and you think it's important, potentially to put on the docket, that can be communicated. And so just putting out that additional idea. I know the Parks Commission has an annual meeting with the council that they find beneficial. And if that's something that this commission would like to consider, we would be happy to coordinate that.
I think we have done that before. As I recall, we did have a joint meeting with the city council. I'm trying to remember, was last year or the year, I think it was the year before last. So there is a precedent for that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would really be, for me anyway, needing to understand what the desired outcome of that meeting would be. Something other than just beer and pizza,
What else do you want?
Although once we can all get together, maybe that's the one thing we should do. Anyway, so and I say that with regard to the timing of it. I think it can be a very beneficial meeting. John, you're right. It's been a while. There was only one that I have attended, but everything's been mixed up for a couple of years. We know that, and we know the reasons why. So
I think a good timing for that, Chair, would be when the council's draft budget comes out, or just before the budget process, because that kind of sets our funding and work plan, and that could be a good opportunity for the planning commissioners to read that and provide feedback.
That's a good idea. When is that on the calendar?
July-ish.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay, any other comments by anyone? We will move on to other business. Extra meeting availability you wanted to talk to us about, Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So to the points that we've just been making about how busy we're going to be here over the next few months in particular, I just wanted to find just kind of either get a sense tonight from the commission about availability over those next few months, even for regular meetings, really. It would be good for us to know if there are dates that are that we're not going to be able to get quorum, or if there are dates where April's wide open, we could meet on any Thursday, that kind of sentiment, or is it that we're kind of committed to these 2 days, and that's kind of the best that we could do just based on people's spring calendar. So I just wanted to open that discussion up, and if it makes more sense for folks to kind of go back and check their calendars and email Michelle with availability, I think that's probably fine too. However you all want to handle it, but I think it'd just be good for staff to know. So as we're trying to put together these schedules, and we have a lot of requirements that we have to meet and milestones that we have to meet, and so just be helpful to us.
Well, why don't we, look at April? I mean, the next two meetings would be April 1st and April 15th. Is there anyone anticipating that they wouldn't be able to attend either one of those two meetings?
I won't be able to attend the 15th.
Okay. So if everybody,
I can't attend the one on the 1st, I don't believe. I think I'm flying back from the East Coast.
okay. So that would still leave us with a quorum for both of those meetings.
Yep.
And then there is a third Thursday at the end of April, April 29th, would be 2 weeks after the 15th, but then it's just 1 week before the scheduled May 6th Planning Commission. So
Yeah, I actually had that date marked on my calendar, Chair. So you're reading my mind with that extra date. But I know any extra Thursday we pick is going to be right before another meeting, I guess. But
yeah,
it'd be nice to know if there was at least one date in there that would be kind of an optional in case things get tight and we need to meet again, if there were a date that everyone would agree to as an optional.
does a April 29th work for folks if we need it to meet some deadlines?
Yes.
No problem.
As much as I'm aware now, I'm available through April.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at my calendar and nothing yet. So always weeds to pull in the garden, but that'll have to wait, I guess. I can still make the meeting.
Could we also talk about May? Is that kind of pushing too far out? Like I was saying, we were hoping to hit potentially May 6th for a hearing, and May 20th. And so we'd have May 6th and May 20th for regular meetings.
Yeah, those are on our regular calendar, so I would hope that most people have their calendars cleared on those two dates.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
That's very helpful to us. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries. So the next meeting will be April 1st.
Yes.
I'm sure there's some kind of foolishness you'll be bringing to us on that date. And
Be a lot of the same that we just talked about, but in far more detail and hopefully generating a lot more questions.
yeah, I think you missed my cheekiness, Carl, but Katrina will explain it afterwards.
Okay.
All right, barring that, I am willing to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously and the planning commission meeting is adjourned at 6:47 PM. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, take care.